Has the U.S. completely surrendered to Israel? Israel orders the U.S. to force South Africa into withdrawing its ICJ case, and the U.S. obeys without a second thought. But this puts many things into question. Where are those grand human rights speeches now? Where's the so-called morality? Has the U.S. abandoned every shred of integrity, blindly following Israel's commands? Let's find out. Is it possible to achieve a world where the powerful nations are finally held accountable, where no amount of money, lobbying, or backdoor deals can shield them from justice? South Africa is attempting to create that world, but as expected, the usual Western suspects are doing everything in their power to make sure it never happens. In a move that has sent shockwaves across global politics, Israeli diplomats have been instructed to pressure U.S. Congress to force South Africa to drop its case against Israel at the International Court of Justice (ICJ). South Africa's case aims to label Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide, a charge that could reshape the geopolitical landscape. This move is met with blatant threats from Israel and its Western allies, promising economic and diplomatic consequences if South Africa doesn't comply. But what makes South Africa's ICJ case a game-changer in international politics? South Africa's decision to take Israel to the ICJ is not just another legal complaint. It's a direct challenge to a system where certain countries operate with near impunity, shielded by the West. For decades, Israel has committed egregious violations of international law in Gaza, including bombings that have decimated schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods. Yet, it has always been protected by its Western allies, most notably the United States, who block any meaningful repercussions. What makes South Africa's ICJ case so dangerous is its potential to shatter this protective shield. If the ICJ rules in favor of South Africa, it could set a legal precedent that Israel and its Western backers fear deeply, that genocide and war crimes are no longer the preserve of the powerless, but can be applied equally to all nations, even those considered untouchable. This case represents more than just legal action. It's about power. South Africa is saying that no country, not even Israel, is above international law, and that terrifies the West. If South Africa succeeds, other nations may follow suit, using international law to hold not just Israel, but any powerful nation accountable for its actions. Suddenly, the legal framework that was once a tool for the powerful to subdue the weak is being flipped on its head. But as expected, the West is not sitting idly by. Israel and its allies are pulling out all the stops to make sure South Africa's voice is silenced before this case can gain any real momentum. So, what underhanded tactics are Israel and the U.S. using to sabotage South Africa's ICJ case? The minute South Africa filed its case, Israel went into full panic mode. A diplomatic cable revealed that Israeli diplomats were instructed to lobby U.S. lawmakers to pressure South Africa. The message was clear: make South Africa pay. This wasn't just a support request, it was a thinly veiled threat, a clear signal to U.S. lawmakers to flex their economic and political muscles. Israel's foreign ministry didn't stop at pressuring Congress. Their diplomats were also told to approach state-level politicians, Jewish organizations, and even governors, rallying everyone they could to push back against South Africa. The ultimate goal was to intimidate South Africa into withdrawing its case by threatening economic sanctions and trade suspensions, effectively weaponizing their Western allies against an African nation standing up for justice. But what's really at play here is a desperate attempt to maintain the status quo. The U.S. Congress is more than happy to act as Israel's attack dog in this scenario. After all, there's no shortage of pro-Israel lobbying groups eager to keep politicians in line. The threat of using economic warfare against South Africa is classic Western bullying, holding the economy hostage to force political compliance. It's the same old tactic: use economic leverage to silence the truth. Despite the immense pressure, South Africa remains unwavering in its pursuit of justice. But why is South Africa so determined to see this case through? What's at stake for them? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. South Africa's decision to pursue this ICJ case isn't just about Gaza or even Israel. It's about something much larger, a moral duty. South Africa's own history of apartheid is deeply intertwined with this case. The parallels between apartheid South Africa and the ongoing occupation of Palestine are undeniable. The forced removals, the systemic discrimination, and the daily humiliation that Palestinians face echo the brutal reality South Africans once lived under. South Africa has a moral obligation to speak out. After overcoming apartheid, the country vowed to stand with all oppressed peoples, a stance that was clearly articulated by Nelson Mandela, who once said, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." South Africa cannot turn its back on this case without betraying its own principles and the legacy of its struggle. Moreover, this case is a significant moment for Africa as a whole. South Africa is not just fighting for Palestinians, it's fighting for Africa's voice on the global stage. For too long, Africa has been treated as a passive player in international politics, its influence dismissed by Western powers. By taking this case to the ICJ, South Africa is asserting that African nations have the right to challenge global injustices and will not be silenced by economic threats or political intimidation. The question now is, what happens if South Africa succeeds at the ICJ? The threats of pressure haven't scared South Africa. The presidency said in a statement, "This case will continue until the court makes a finding." While the case is in progress, we hope Israel will abide by the country's provisional orders issued to date. And if the ICJ rules in favor of South Africa, the ripple effects could be seismic. First and foremost, it would send a clear message that no nation is above the law, not even Israel, with all its Western support. It would signal a new era of accountability, where even the most powerful nations can be held responsible for their actions on the global stage. This case could set a legal precedent that changes the way international law is enforced. For too long, international law has been weaponized by the West to serve its interests. Nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have often found themselves on the receiving end of international sanctions and legal actions, while the US and its allies, including Israel, have been able to act with impunity. South Africa's case could flip this dynamic on its head. It would show that international law is not just a tool of the powerful, but a means of justice for all. Furthermore, this case could inspire other nations to take action. If South Africa can stand up to Israel and the US, what's stopping other nations from doing the same? We could see a wave of similar cases being brought to the ICJ, challenging not just Israel, but any nation that violates international norms under the guise of self-defense or national security. The ICJ itself stands at a crossroads. If the court rules fairly and impartially, it will restore faith in the institution as a genuine arbiter of global justice. But if it bows to pressure from the West and dismisses the case, it will only confirm what many already believe, that international institutions are little more than tools of the powerful. In the end, how is South Africa's ICJ case emblematic of Africa's rising influence in global politics? South Africa's ICJ case is a defining moment for Africa's role in international affairs. For far too long, African nations have been sidelined and treated as pawns in the geopolitical games of the West. But that dynamic is shifting. African nations are no longer content to sit on the margins. They are demanding a seat at the table, and they are using their voices to challenge the global status quo. This case is symbolic of Africa's growing influence. It's a statement that African nations will not be bullied into silence, nor will they allow their sovereignty to be undermined by economic or political threats from the West. South Africa is showing the world that Africa has the moral authority to stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. But this case is just the beginning. As African nations continue to rise economically and politically, they will play an increasingly important role in shaping global policy. Africa's young population, its growing economies, and its strategic resources make it a key player in the 21st century. The days of Africa being dismissed or ignored by the West are over. As more African nations follow South Africa's lead, we can expect to see Africa taking a stronger stance on global issues, whether it's climate change, human rights, or international justice. This case is not just about Gaza or even Israel. It's about Africa asserting itself as a moral and political force on the global stage. It's about African nations standing up to Western domination and showing the world that they have a role to play in shaping international justice. The ICJ case signals that Africa will no longer accept the status of a passive bystander, but will actively engage and influence global debates, especially when the West fails to deliver justice. The broader implications are clear. Africa is no longer the continent that simply absorbs the consequences of Western policies. It is now a continent capable of shaping those policies. South Africa's bold stance at the ICJ is a beacon of what's to come. This case isn't just about one country or one conflict. It's a signal that Africa is stepping into a new era of leadership, not only on the African continent, but in global politics. Should the U.S. pressurize South Africa? Is America even practicing what it preaches on human rights? Let us know in the comments section. Has the U.S. just exposed itself as unfit to ever speak on human rights again with this outrageous move? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.